All right, outstations. We'll go ahead and get started. My name's Major Tony Caristi. I'm just facilitating this discussion here. Everybody should have a copy of the read-ahead materials that we sent out recently, and really just want to kind of get over in a short amount of time the information that's brought up on the display screen, which is it's also hung in the chat if you aren't seeing it. But those three questions and really focusing the outcomes on out of the .mil-PF lens, we really want to focus on organization, training, and personnel. So with that, I really just want to turn it over for discussion. And that first question, what we're really looking for is AG community, how do we build predictive and prescriptive analysis capability to enable commanders to focus on the fight? And anybody on the outstations, if you want to just chime in also, let us know. You can raise your hand, send a message in the chat. We have people monitoring the chat so we can take care of it from there.
First, if I can start off, I think it's all based on data. So we have to do a better job at how do we capture and collect data so we can produce the type of product and analysis that we need. So we have to become more data collectors than anything else. I don't think the systems we have right now have enough of what we need in order to really categorize how do we put people in buckets if we want to, or how to lead to some decisions to make sure commanders can actually go out there and look at data, not the data, but information after we process the data, they can see it. So we need to become a little bit more data collector, which we're not. We're very system, and we really look at systems and we just try to build on top of what the system has instead of just trying to fix the system so it provides the basis to move in that direction.
Yeah, so I'll definitely add on to that. So absolutely correct. So first of all, I think we have to have a little bit of an honest idea of what it means to get to predictive and prescriptive analytics. It takes years of data to get to that point. So Greg will probably tell you, I think United had started their analytics, and it took them several years to get to the point where they could do any type of, prescriptive analytics. So, the start is, with Mr. Bencourt's right, you have to have a place to put the data first, and you have to ensure that it's normalized. So you're bringing in stuff, it's tagged to a certain place, and then you're able to get to it and query it how you need in order to get to the analytics. So I think it puts us in a place to start that, but if you really want to do prescriptive analytics at the bigger level, the Army also needs to come on board with how does the big Army manage it.
So maybe is this a tiered situation that we're talking about here, where so right now we're moving towards the predictive, right? We have that ability, but I think we still have some room to grow there, right?
I think we have an ad hoc report ability.
Yeah.
We do not have a predictive level.
We are somewhere between descriptive and diagnosis. Maybe we're doing some diagnosis. We figure out why it happened, but we're nowhere near to say what's going to happen right now, because that would involve forecasting. That would involve actually looking into analytics tools. At least you can do in Excel too if you really have to in your life, but that involves a lot more than what we're doing right now. And for prescriptive to be actually tell a commander, here's what you need to do to reach that goal based on data and forecasting and analytics, we're nowhere near that. We're like five years deep.
I mean, you look at the organization. You would have to look at what we teach at every level and see what we need to put into place to build talent, right? To build the talent to be able to do this type of analysis.
So that's where we really do want to focus. I hear a lot of we don't even have the systems in place. And the focus here is organization and training and personnel. But which one of those has to come first? Is it the people that we need to have the ability? So we send them off to school and do advanced analytics capabilities, degrees.
It feels like the boss's chart. It has a chart with the institution that takes care of some part.
Right.
Then we have the operational unit do something, and then self-development. You apply the same model to this.
Hey, this is Major Felker. Can everybody hear me?
Yes,
sir, we hear you.
Hey, real quick, is anybody on the breakout right now utilizing Vantage or Vanna?
We're aware of its capabilities. We've seen it used at the company level right now, but I haven't seen it in a battalion metric capability yet.
So they're actually PEO EIS or PEO Vantage, however you want to say it, is working towards the sourcing, the data sourcing piece to feed it into Vantage. And one of the primary aspects of that is to be able to link data across silos. So we could take the G1 data and connect it with the G3 or the GA or the G4 at the soldier entity level. And one of the follow-on pieces to that is that machine learning, that artificial intelligence piece. They're getting there. I think the challenge is right now it's just getting the systems themselves connected to it. Does that make sense?
Hey, let me give you 2 cents of world that all the senior leaders are talking about right now. Number one, almost all HR folks are getting this master's degree from one tier university, and it's HR. That needs to change radically. And we need to focus people in to different types of degrees that will match an emerging AG capability set that ties to the future strategy of AG. And a lot of that is going to revolve around data and analytics and being able to run our own system and systems and series of systems. So we need to push the baseline skill set for every single AG officer, soldier, warrant officer into understanding how analytics, data, et cetera, operates. Now, that's not their entire job, but as you get to 2050, that becomes almost your entire job as you get further and further out and the numbers come down in the Army, et cetera. There's massive problems with Vantage and its funding levels today that probably preclude it from being utilized in 5 to 10 years. HRC spends $400 million in sustainment of our current systems, which is going to be rated and depleted. It stays a part of the strategy going forward, but what you need to create in the core is the ability to understand what we're talking about. Like, folks should understand, hey, what is predictive analytics and how do I actually use it? Like, we should understand what that means as a core capability in our core and be able to facilitate that moving forward. And I think you have to start right now, multiple different avenues, right? Degrees are interesting, certifications are interesting. All of that is already within the wheelhouse for us to do. We just need to do this. Hey, you're not going to Webster's. You're going to these 10 master's degree programs. Hey, you're not going to Webster's. You're not going to Webster's. You're not going to Webster's. You're going to do something else that gets you the types of capabilities that you need. And then some can stay at Webster's. Hey, okay, you want the easy button? Go ahead. Keep going there. But when you have 60 to 70% of the core getting an HR master's from the same place, that's not good. But that's where we're at right now in the AG world in the Army. And then there's virtually zero data analytics certifications. There are some SAFR and other certifications, right? But we're not tracking them in a way that we're utilizing those folks based on the certifications and training they take. So we have to, in my mind, and I think in the BOD's mind, radically re-whipper all of that to get it more structured. And then, Chief, to everybody's points, that was kind of whipping around, you got to embed this into the schooling at every echelon, different amounts at different echelons. You guys got to do that hard work as to how do you do that? How do you, infuse it?
Sir, 2 things on that. One, are you the opinion that we need to start targeting those and recruiting those out of college, that we need those computer system driven individual
A
degrees?
certain amount.
So that would be a separate trail for that.
A certain amount, right?
Right.
Because the other thing that's going to start to emerge too, that we're going to throw on the table, the strategy for you guys to chew on, is if we're involved in culture, EO, diversity, equity, the degrees that kind of drive that specialty is stuff like organizational psychology, even the leadership type degrees, get a healthy dose of that. So that becomes one of the pillars that we're interested in. Marketing, there's a bunch of stuff that ties to how you execute talent management and recruiting skills and that ability to synchronize stuff. All of that tends to lead to someone that has a little bit of, background in all of that. Of course, I'm a history degree holder. I mean, I guess you got to make room for a few of us. Criminology, I don't know, Chief, what your undergrad is.
Computer program.
Right, so that's good. Right, so you can't limit it to others. It's just there needs to be an overt discussion about, hey, if the Corps is going to provide value for the Army. And I hope you guys picked up on what Steve Ayton said at the end. Right? You have a TRADOC entity trying to take over the entire HR Corps. Just want you guys to understand that. And there's a perception that we're not bringing it to the table. We're not being distinctive in our value. And a lot of this is tied to this kind of discussion we are now having. Hey, we can be experts in this area. We can be experts in this area. And then we can really facilitate that movement.
So follow-on question is, to maintain that credibility within the Army as a Corps, does the structure change? And maybe there's no structure change. Does there need to be, is this an ASI or is this a 42 Fox
Depends how you
now?
want to define it.
So I think that's where we need to go,
That's where we
right?
need
So
to go, that's
start
right.
thinking about that. So I would tell you, go pull the Army education requirements for AG positions on the MTOs, right? You're going to find that we collectively, not just you, we collectively have a ton of work to do to actually think through what makes sense at echelon, at different jobs. I would say if you're going to sit in that readiness job in the Pentagon, you probably need some kind of analysis, like certification. But we don't do that. Or we haven't yet. Same thing with OP, EP, all of these positions running the enterprise in HRC. We have not said, hey, you probably need to go get that degree before you come in and take this enterprise level job, et cetera. So I think there's that. And then there's this lower level, Chief's really working on certifications. So, I mean, if I was king of the day, I'd be like, every warrant officer, you are getting a data certification within the next 5 years or you're not getting promoted. And just start there. And guess what? Everybody will go get it because they'll start to make choices based on our in-state goals and directives versus, hey, just go do SAFR if you want. It's good if you want. And then use it to get out of the Army kind of thing. It's more directive towards, hey, we're headed in this direction.
Do you think that part of the strategy as we develop the timeline is because if now we're going to get a lot of people trying to get a degree and they're not going to use it and they may just lose it. So we have to lay that out so it's.
But I challenge that. I mean, if you're in our S1 business, this is applicable to like everything. Like, how do you look at a problem set and come up with multiple options, right? And then, like my big thing going into OP is I'm going to make data-driven decisions. And I don't find that radical, but then folks are like, ooh, what does that mean? Like, means show me the analysis, and then what are you inferring from the analysis? And then that's how we're presenting it to the CG and the Vice and others, just in the handful of engagements that I've taken as OP director. But that same level of fidelity needs to be with S1s.
Right, so we have to put that in each NPC. So let's tell us when do we begin pushing? We need to get this degree.
And you guys are probably not the ones that are having the problems, right? You guys, since you're sitting in here, you already kind of get this. You're already probably doing it. You've brought it along in your careers with your experience and your gut. But
Those are,
there's a lot that are not.
what I like to see for warrants, right? We're talking about the warrants and things, what are the chances of doing ACEs or paying for their masters in and stuff like this? Because I mean, to be honest with you, 5 years ago when I asked, people were laughing at me. And they're like, yeah, if you want to do it on your own time, go ahead. And I was like, no, data analytics we are behind already, and like, we don't have that. So,
Step one, you got to recode the MTOs.
yes, absolutely.
Right? It's actually not hard. We just have to do the work. Don't let Chief Hickman ever leave, right? And make sure he does the work, or he never, gets to sleep and he doesn't get promoted to do so. The money part, here's the problem, right? This is why I bring it up about Vantage, right? Vantage is costing the Army about $150 million a year. $150 million a year. And it's just, it's a good capability that costs a tremendous amount of money. we need to lay in these requirements, and then you go fight for prioritization of funding. And while the funding may not all be there as we get started, we can continue to make the argument that funding needs to be here for a certain amount of people, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, as you go. And then if you slightly nudge people, right, they're making a choice on Webster's because it's easy, folks.
Yeah.
We've set it up to be easy for them. We can nudge people to top 10 programs that all have the same capability as Webster's now. Like the #1 HR program in America, you know where it's at? USC, not this one, the real one. Right? The real one. Anyway, that's a joke. I love the Gamecocks. They have an online program, and we're already talking to them on multiple fronts for different programs for folks at NTC and others. They're willing to do a program directly for the AG Schoolhouse. I'm actually going to travel out there in a couple of weeks to talk to their director of military program. There's just a lot of options if we're thinking and driving and throwing ideas out on the table. I'm sorry, Sean, I'm talking.
So just listening to a couple of things, and these are the points that came up, is that when we talk about gathering data, we still do a great job of grabbing a whole bunch of stuff, but a lot of times there's too many ways for it to be a lot of ambiguity in it. Meaning we can go in there and think that we're collecting A, but ultimately somebody like Mercedes went around to get to the end state, right? And you didn't intentionally do it, wasn't nefarious, but they fudged the data. So now the data going in isn't necessarily what we intended it to be. To collect
Data.
right. We talked about getting the descriptive and predictive, but we don't do any modeling because a lot of what we get is driven from the Army. So if we're not at the table, or at least part of the conversation with how the Army is going to change how we fight, then we can't build that into a model with the data that we have, then we spend a lot of time rearranging decks on the Titanic via PowerPoint to think that this is what's going to work. But we have nothing data to point to it and say, well, based on these 6 models, this is the one that worked the best.
Right, absolutely right.
And I think another point is that we're trying to mix the social science with the data science. When we talk about people, no amount of data courses from any great university is going to teach somebody how to be a social scientist. And that's what drives talent management, is the people portion of it. You could give all the opportunity in the world, but if that person only wants to go to Hawaii, and that's the only reason they need to stay in, then that's the social piece of it. No amount of analytics is going to get you to convince that person in the Army to do anything else with them.
But Chief, you know, because we only have 50 minutes, and we're beautiful with this in the AG Corps, right? We just talk a lot about problems. Like I would tell you, come out with an action plan, and I almost just told you what I think it is, right? Go back and analyze the top 10 programs for data certification for data analysts, visualization of data. You know, right? You probably already know them, Chief. What are the top 10 programs in HR, a couple other fields, and then start to say, okay, I probably should code out a bunch of MTOs, and then I should probably figure out how I nudge people into these directions as they start coming through here at the schoolhouse. And then that would at least start to get this whole thing rolling. If you start going 10 times every year where you got people doing those types of things versus what they're doing today, all of a sudden in 5 years, right, you have about 50 people in the Corps you can start leaning on to really start thinking through stuff. We've seen this with TWI, right? We've had 15 officers now that have gone through TWI and have been tied back to the program. Only 3 kind of washed out, right, because they didn't want to change. Like they went into the program, couldn't change. Like, no, the Army does it this way. Hey, okay, thank you, appreciate it. But the rest have been absolutely game-changing for Rebecca on the program, taking massive leads. Like one captain is running the infrastructure side of the IPSA program and has instituted and coordinated at the Army level the ability to monitor system performance. He did his thing at Wells Fargo, and then helped create a strategic connection to technical lead at Wells Fargo that's helped us actually think through that. That's one kid. One kid is like strategic. I mean, anyway, you get 50 people going to these types of experiences and programs for us, we start to change the game really quickly. Now, if we sit here and complain for another 2 years, right? If we don't have this, and this, right? We're all going to be here in 4 years, actually doing the same group chat we're having right now and just admiring the problem. You actually have to like put into steps. You know, you got to put in actions to the steps to actually get to a point that changes.
You have to
We
take that
really do
risk.
spend a lot of time in my problems like that. Because we can sit in here all day long and talk about where we should head. But I will say, you know, the TWI changed because it was a partnership between the schoolhouse and CASCOM to get those TWIs changed so that we were using those folks to put them to where the Army was going. You really have a point in time where we have to get our AG senior leaders and our HR senior leaders together to move the direction of the Corps that way. So I think that's the other piece of that. It's like we can have great ideas at the lower level and understand it, but I mean, it's just like IPSA, right? IPSA probably would have been dead a long time ago without someone like Colonel Johnson bringing in the schoolhouse, bringing in HRC, but also the top cover of the chief and the Army senior leaders. So that's almost what it's going to take for our Corps to change direction. Maybe you don't need the chief, right? But we have to move in a direction. We have to decide what direction we want to go, and then you need to set the opportunity in place. So you know, we're fighting for talk about ACS. You know, I think it was Tony that talked about ACS and return on investment. You know, to me, return on investment isn't you know, the ADSO that comes with going to ACS. So there's a captain that has an information technology degree that I would really love. I sent him to an ACS utilization, and he got moved out of that utilization. So now he's just in a random signal billet. Well, that's great. I need him. So you know, I'm fighting with the OP director to try to bring him to the team because we could use his talent and really get return on investment on what the Army, you know, the Army paid for him to go to school for. So I mean, we need to build those opportunities in too. You know, I don't know who controls what ACS. I don't even know what we have for ACS. But you know, when we make the selections, where do people go to school? What are they getting a degree for? You know, and then where do we put them? Same with the software. You know, I think about the Futures Command and the software factory. Where are we putting the people from the software factory? We're just randomly spreading them around, you know, the Army. No, they should probably deliver. We should probably fight for some of those folks, you know?
Here's the other thing, and I know I'm talking a lot, and then I'll give it to the if you guys would create or get a tool that you would run every AG person through to validate do they have an ability to be an analyst or analytical, right? And these things exist already. If you gave that to every AG person, then you could start to think through, hey, I really want this crowd to go this way. I want this crowd to go this way. I want this crowd to go this way. We're going to end up with still needing to do more than just data, right? There's still a ton of AG stuff we have to do. But then you would be able to start thinking through, you know, hey, Johnson, here's the 10 people that actually could go to a data science PhD program and come to HRC and help you run the system, right? And you can start to get into that business a lot more effectively than the way we're doing it today.
Hey, this is Major Felker again. I'm coming from it not from an AG perspective, but from an ORSA perspective. But the ORSA proponency does several things. Number one, they manage a continuing education program that offers some limited certifications in all manner of analytics and data science, and throw any buzzwords you want in there. So has the AG community considered something like that? And then number two, there's actually already an ASI on the books for artificial intelligence. I don't know who actually runs it because the folks that were the proponency actually went out of business quite a few years ago. But then PA&E also established sort of a position skill identifier. But in order to get it, unfortunately, they have very narrowly defined the skill requirements. So it's out there. It's just how much you might be able to adopt it.
Thank you. I want to turn it over to Lieutenant Colonel Skelton Riley. I saw you had your hand up.
Hey, thanks. My question was related to the training opportunities that you mentioned at USC. Is there a chance to get those into the broadening assignments that we have in our programs over the summer, where we have 2 to 3 week residencies with several organizations so that we can kind of target our AG HR professionals over?
Yeah, I'll take that too. We've been working with Marcus. I did, so there's a grad program called GSIP. I don't know if folks are familiar with it or not. There's 7 disciplines. I actually gave guidance to the AG branch. We're not sending officers to social science, well, not social science, security studies degrees. Like everyone knows, if you go to ILE or the War College, you're going to get a security studies degree. And so I kind of rerouted our applicants towards data science analytics, but that's only 1 for this year. So that's not a lot, but the other route is ACS in general, and then to your point, how do we tweak some of these other current programs to get maybe something more of what we're interested in.
Well, I already talked to Chief about also some baseline ability here in the schoolhouse. So I sent somebody for certification, but they're teaching some baseline shorter certification and shorter degree to give you the baseline to another layer.
So we talked about the employee and all that stuff. I think the ticket right is the ASI because that creates a requirement. So when you send people to training, you're not worried about losing them to a signal thing, right? I think that it's a capacity to manage folks as they move along. I think that there's room within the MTOs to code positions, whether it's like the HROC chief or something like that. To me, that makes sense. That makes sense for not just utilization, but honestly, it's almost a career path along the ASI. And it wouldn't have to be an ASI. It could be a whole nother MOS, right? But creating an ASI allows us to create certification programs, allows us to create ASI qualification courses, et cetera. It provides us with the funding and the resources, I think, to get to where we need to go. And those can continue to develop, and as the data analytics requirements, progress over time, that's the courses and stuff they can do. But you can highlight people like Chief would say, all right, I don't need him to go take a division, right? It'd be good for his leadership and stuff, but he's got talents that I need to use in other ways, very much that way, right? And there's multiple people, and we have done some talent management, but it's kind of off the book stuff, right? To where, but we're gonna. I got an extra person here, and I'm going to use them at this course. It's not the only course that's doing it. Just go do great stuff for the Corps, make everybody else's job easier. But I don't know, so I do think there's a piece of it to where I think there's a baseline, yes, and we kind of do that through our Microsoft Excel program, and that's a level to it. But I do believe that there's a particular mental capacity and desire to do some of that stuff. I don't think everybody wants to go out and learn coding.
So it's not necessarily about coding though, right? So
it's not necessarily, but there is a group of folks that can do a lot of stuff that way and saves an amount of time. It's people that can write an SQL, so I don't have to one by one add somebody to an MS team. They can just click a button and 1,400 people are done.
Anybody in here doing Python?
So
When we're looking through which parts of this we want to address, just something to think about it. What echelon are we trying to get to this level of expertise? And the reason I ask this is, this is a strategic problem, right? The capability that we could bring to the fight as HR professionals with this kind of knowledge would be at the strategic level. And maybe there's something at the tactical and operational level. But the question I have is, if we send somebody to this pipeline and they graduate the career course with that master's degree in analytics, or maybe they do TWI somewhere, is there a world where they go and we have to advocate, because I know how it works, but SAMS puts them in for 1 year and then they go utilize at the division level as a strategic planner doing this for the HR planning community. Is that a thing that we could see in the future, or is that just a waste of?
So for me, this is a way of doing HR stuff. This is not specific to an echelon. This is, we have to internalize analytics and start from the bottom up. So I have no issue with having a good E7 or E6 and a battalion that knows analytics, because that grows my warrant officer efficiency of being applied for warrant officer package, right? I have no issue with my captains going down and doing that certain type of job, either battalion or division. So I don't think it's tied to an echelon. I think it's tied to a mentality that as a core, we have to bring that into as part of our competence, that we become analysts. So that we can have, because ASIs, I'll be limited for how many I can put around. Maybe I can do an MOS where I push a different trail, that is the fox on a steroid or something like that. So I don't see it as that we started a division and that we put the first analysts. I think we need to just get away from that and think outside the box and say, if I started my lowest level where I have an S1 in my battalion, and I enable that person so they can do analysis at their level to be able to tell their commander, this is what I do. If that question is yes, then we look at that position and we start right
When
here.
we talked about that, so the warrant officer modernization thing, right? So we requested 2 weeks in every course, typically focus on people analytics and using the buzzwords where we can to get stuff improved. But it's going to require either growth or taking risk in other stuff within the PME. Because in a no-growth environment, it would be awesome to be able to take 2 weeks and do a basic analytics course or whatever it may be, but it requires, so we're either going to get rid of, or we're going to get rid of NDMP, or we're going to get rid of,
That's part of what we have
or
to
we
do.
get 2 weeks, right?
We have to
So,
relook
so
the whole
I,
schedule.
this is my worldview, right? So,
Baseline.
and Chief, you know me, so you know I'm a little more risk, willing to take risk. Others may not understand. If you don't change the game right now, this core is going to be gone in several, scores of years. So if we continue to go, our legacy schooling is so important, but it's leading us to a point where we're not valued. We got to take a hard look and go, hey, let's take some risk in some things and change the game. So that's my view. That's what I'm advocating with all the way up to the senior leader levels with the AG bond. Chief, the other thing I would say is I think it's twofold. I do think there's a baseline that we need. But for instance, one of the problems that I have at HRC, we need a cadre of green suitors to be well-versed in analytics and data and databases, and then go off and get specific degrees, and then continue to have several iterations running the enterprise's systems. Because we have to change this. I have 1,000 contractors, I pay $400 million a year, and then we have crap, which is what we have, right? If the best thing you can do is web EDAS and TOPNIS and AIM, then we have a serious problem. And that is not the world. And by the way, it's not safe either. It's sitting in a data center. And we don't have the ability to defend ourselves with contractors defending ourselves for the most part. We have to change that paradigm if we're going to survive as a core, number one, and then number two, to really provide value to the Army. Provide value to the Army. We have to change the game. But again, my 2 cents.
So I'm looking at Jim Galuza's comment right there about until the Army culture is changed and commanders, senior leaders see value in their HR experts tracking and using the capability. So we'll get stuck delivering reports. So I'm going to flip that, right? It's not the Army culture and commanders saying, hey, I value what you bring to the table. We bring our values, so that's what we're trying to do here. You're trying to set yourself in the core up to a position where your commander's not going to say, "Oh, you have no value because you can't provide me what I need." We need to give our S1s and our HR professionals the tools to make sure that their commander can't say that. Say, "Hey, sorry, just provide me your report."
I don't know any commander in the Army that's asking for a report. The default is they ask for a report because they don't trust the S1. And so they just say, hey, give me this. And then they're weeding through it. And so if someone is asking for a report, it's actually indicative of where we're at. And if, like I had the sage advice that Bob Whaley gave me before I went to the G1. Today, you know your business. Don't let anyone tell you what your business is going into 190. You're there to advise and tell commanders that, at brigade level and the command level what the hell they should be doing based on your analysis. It's like the best, 4 minutes of talk I've had in my life as an AG officer. And I really lived it when I was the G1 out there. That kind of thing is just showing us that we don't have the skill sets at the E6 level in battalions, right? And then with some of our young warrants, and then certainly with some of our officers, to actually get into analysis on the fly.
And it's not because they're not smart enough. I guess that's the thing, right? But we've just gotten into this PME that do certain things, and here's our system, and this is what we're going to do. So, yeah.
But
We haven't taught.
but
Certainly not that we're not, I mean, we are smart enough. I am convinced.
Well, I'm
What Colonel Ayers and Chief were talking about is like what levels and that last comment. So with that analytics, the levels of, everybody's gonna touch it, but you have to look at it. You're gonna have consumers at the lowest level. You create a visualization, a model, dashboard. Commanders are gonna see it. They're not gonna go there, create models, but they will see the data. Lower echelon is gonna see it. Then at some echelon, it changes, and these are the creators where they're gonna do it. And then you're gonna have to have something else at the higher echelon, and that's who makes the links on that system. I'm gonna nerd it out a little bit, but for example, who has that API to get the code? And by the way, I would love to give you some APIs on an OTE, so I can actually run some analytics.
Where's he at?
So he's at first floor.
You're getting reassigned.
I told him to be
Stabilizer.
Oh, we cannot do that.
So, because
I think I was the OP director.
Because to me, my thing is right now is, I'm looking at two things. Number one, governance. Like, we need to have some governance. We cannot afford to go back into data store and everybody did their own thing. And the access, nobody knew how to get the right access. You need to know the secret handshake. The governance, that's all it is. What's the minimum access that everybody needs to actually do their job, do the right stuff? How do you get there? And how do we formalize that everybody does the same way?
So this is what I was thinking. So you have expertise that most people in our Corps don't have. So most people don't know what an API is, right? So when we have a conversation about building an API and what you can do with it, right? I literally just had a discussion with my team about how we're changing the way our API pulls data through the OBIE warehouse, right?
Yes.
So, and how do you make that available to different populations?
Absolutely.
So we could have that discussion, right? But we as a program haven't been having that regular discussion with the HR community because most people wouldn't understand it, and they're not able to use
Create a
it.
Dragon Master crew that has access, but literally has all Army access.
And
I think
We
that
have
would be
people on, yeah.
And it can be on the OT just to set up something, because that's another thing. The more we can show commanders, like, here's what we really can do. Then we get the buying, then we get the licenses, then we get more training opportunities.
But the point is, we gotta create 50.
But you have to be
But
careful.
where do we start? Where do we start?
So this is what I mean. So instead of, I want an API, right? So I can build something and then you talk about licenses, right? We did that with Click, right? We were gonna get a whole lot of licenses. It was gonna go free. What we wanna do is leverage what we have so that you're not building something else. So I'll have my team talk to you so you can see what's built. So you'll be able to see
Saber?
the mashups that they're building. Yeah, some of it is Saber, but they're building, but that's just one piece, yeah. So there's 5 different modules in there, but that's just the start, right? Because, that's the team, what we're funded to do. But they have an API that they're working off of. So it would make sense that you would just work off of that same API.
My concern with that is because, you're always gonna get hit with off-board requirements from the commanders. We might have to run something that it's not there. And number 2, now we always funnel into, these guys are building they're building the dashboard, you're just the consumer. Which, again, you funnel yourself to have just very limited pool of creators. Versus, I know we're talking about, licenses that are source subject, but Power BI, everybody start buying licenses. They're $7.68 per person per year. That's all that thing costs. So more and more commanders are going into buying these licenses for Power BI since we're kind of already in better.
Yeah, but what I'm suggesting is rather than building a separate API to do that, well, we should just use the API.
Yeah, just need that endpoint.
Now funding a we keep building APIs, right? You know what?
But you will if you get incorporated. Go back to Myron and Ollie and a couple others on the, if you know incorporate.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying, not a different one, I just think the endpoint and the method of logging, and everything just, you know.
But for this thing, and if anybody is like perplexed by the last 2 minutes, the point is that's why we need to force people into being educated. Right? We have to. And there is a point, 2030, 2045, that if you can't get there with this kind of talk, then you're probably not coming to the AG. Right? We're not going to have the slots or the mental capacity to have people who can't get through some of this stuff. Now, you don't have to be able to build APIs and link, but you certainly as all heck is going to have to look at the data and be able to analyze and give recommendations. Like
So
you have
that's
to
another side of it, so there's,
got to move into business.
there's the software side, and then there's the intelligence side.
Yeah.
And really, it's the ability to critically and creatively look at data and sometimes go, hey, I need this, I'm trying to figure out this, can you make all the data advance? And so I think there's also two sides to it.
I argue there's three. So there's the software creation, the being able to make the data say what we want to say, but then there's the interpretation of it. Right? So if I'm only putting people, and I know you said at every echelon, but in reality, I'm not going to have it at every echelon. Maybe in 10, 15 years I can. But until then, I need to have somebody at the battalion level that can interpret the data that gets pushed out by core division, brigade.
So you can't miss this human piece too, right? Like again, 60 days in OP, and I get like the book answer. We're not doing this because of this, and I'm just like, but you're screwing this person like ridiculously. Well, yeah, but that's the rules. Okay, just do something else. Don't tell anybody, but do something else.
It's just like.
So there's no, I think Major Galuzzo and Major Belfer.
I just wanted to, can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right, so I just wanted to clarify. I mean, the point that I was trying to make with the Army culture is that we are so accustomed to not having a tool to provide information that they just don't understand what we're capable of delivering. But at the same time, we also are not prepared to go into the depth because we've just been providing the basic level in what I call the skill level 10 tasks. When you go into businesses in the civilian sector, they have so much more capability to look at numbers, data across that they can aggregate, and then they are thinking about the questions. It's not a give me the right answer and I'll regurgitate. It's I have to think through this problem, and I think it starts with here in the school redesigning the way that we train the information, not just the clickology or the follow route A to B. I think that's an important aspect that we're looking at. And so my point is that I think when we're looking at what we're delivering right now versus where we want to go, we have to re-engineer everything from the rules to the assignments processes to the training capacity of what we're putting in the classroom. And that's a pretty significant cultural shift.
But we have to do it, Jay. I mean, regardless, because if we don't take that step, then IPSI is going to overwhelm us.
Oh, I absolutely agree.
And we have to learn how to dominate that monster. So we have to get to train our people to do that kind of stuff.
Well, but let me ask this. I have no idea, right? So I just remember being in OBC and having like a 7-hour block of instruction on how to do the OER. Like it was something like that, and then at the end of the lesson, this is 97, so I'll date myself. And they said, "Hey, we're getting a new OER, so you just got to forget that course." But I mean, do you still spend that kind of time going through some of that type of stuff tied to the regs?
We are much more agile in changing stuff, but there is probably, I mean, you could look at stuff, but it's the learning curve, right? To where you're not training to Lieutenant Johnson, you're training to Lieutenant Hickman, right? To the one in the middle, on the top of that curve, you're trying to get there. Are there ways? And then it's all compo as well too, right? So where the level of learning coming in. It's not necessarily all the same, but it's definitely something to think about, yes, as to where do you take risks? And what is, they're gonna get it operational anyway, right? We don't train a ton of times on how to do stuff that they do every day, right? You kind of train on stuff that's hard to do, it's done every now and then it's just rarely done, but it's really hard to do on a test on it, right? So maybe there's that methodology that you can get for what you train.
And all I'm
Are there
suggesting
gaps?
is,
Sure.
I would argue that the is rudimentary as EES kind of is aesthetically and intuitively, it has taken a lot of the onus off of the one to spend 7 hours in the classroom learning. So the technology, while it took some time, has advanced the AG core in that regard. So now it's just, I don't care what the comments say anymore. I'm just checking to make sure the code doesn't get kicked back by some honorary, somebody at HRC, and then submit. I don't need to track them anymore. It's you're the reader, not me.
Sir, what we teach, what we focus on in the career course, and I can't speak to Bullet because theirs is a different set of instructions, but as far as the career course is concerned, I would say out of the 5 months that we have, somewhere in the 70% of instruction, because a lot of it's practical exercise and exam assessments and stuff like that, but I would say 70% of it is art, not science, right? I teach you the science, but then I got to give you my experience and Army experience and why we do what we do and how you can best advise commanders. So it is a massive amount of art because the science is, like you said, the science is simple. EES is there. I just click submit. It's going to give me an error message for 80% of the things HRC is going to take it back for. I don't have
1,000 different ways to manage a senior rater profile.
Yeah, exactly. So I just, it's hard to serve.
So we're talking about kind of, with the starters. So I just got a question. So Excel, is there anywhere in the schoolhouse platform right now just do some Excel classes?
Yes.
So they do the basics Excel coming into the basic course, they do the advanced Excel coming into the advanced courses, and I think the CCC as well.
We do.
And then, I'm not sure how integrated it is into the lesson plan, so when we do a metric, we do an HR metric class, and they do some polls and they run through, but it's not like advanced pivot queries.
But is it, because I noticed a lot of people who used to teach it, people in class and they're like, oh, I know Excel. I'm like, yeah, we'll see. Are they taught how to use it, or are they just, for example, like a formula?
Yeah.
Are they taught, you type this formula, you get the results, or are they taught, here's what Excel is, here's what it does, here's what the formula is.
So that's
So
the
Excel,
using Excel.
And that's the thing, because if you know what a formula is and how to build it, you don't need to memorize 30 formulas. You know how to use that tool. Forget about level formulas. Go
It
play.
is practically used.
Yes.
It is practically used when you're doing primarily HR metrics. You use it quite a bit to pull data and then analyze it. But
There's not enough time, so that's the problem.
Until like that one class where they 3 hours at the beginning teaching like even the runaround and how to build the formula, what that is. I don't know, that gave me the most impact on the rest of the classes because it wasn't like, oh, let me type something and struggle with it. It's like, oh, I know how to build a formula. Teach me something new. And then in 3 days, we went from like no sales skill to like recording macros, building macros. 3 days.
Yeah, so we show here's what we can do with Excel, right? And we'll show them this Wazoo end state product with macros and drop down, buttons and all kinds of cool stuff. But then we go back and say, okay, here's how we get there. And we don't get them to build a macro. We don't. It's a shortened period of time. But we don't even look at access. Like, we don't touch that.
It's not live support anymore.
So, sir, what do you need from us? Because I know we're running against time.
We have 9 minutes left.
So what do you need from us for the OTP answers that you need? Do you have enough, or?
It's the culture change, right? So, it's not common on, right? I mean, obviously he's on board with this kind of concept, but we have to sit down.
I mean, we can answer this.
Yeah, we can talk through this. There's wiggle room in the classes, and when we do, we try and get back and go, for instance, Excel. For the most part, students usually are happy to go back and talk more Excel stuff. But it's a massive overhaul of POI. It's
the instructor being able to talk about it.
Yeah, but you guys gotta lay out the specified tasks you have to do to execute what we just talked about and put it, I'm telling you, these two right here at the front, I'm gonna come back and hit list you. Like you have to, this is how you get out of admiring the problem, right guys? You actually put the tasks down and then hold yourself accountable to executing the task. This is like Army 101, right? The only reason I still survived in the Army today is because I could do that. If you don't do that, right, we will be all back next year, and Marcus will get a one-time redo of his conference and his time as the commandant.
Sir, so absolutely understand all, and will go. I think where we're at, and again, this isn't anything we brought up with the commandant, he probably already knows and has wheels and knows on it, but the varying capabilities amongst instructors plays into this severely. So I need to go sit down in a course, because I can do I can do VLOOKUPs and I can do, standard stuff, but I'm no Colonel Rick Strong who can build, crazy stuff.
So we've done this doesn't matter, and that's what Anthony Munoz was doing here.
Yeah.
So they were.
So let me
They taught us,
guys, let me push back real quick. I'm actually saying something even more elementary. Like a review of the MTOs, that's a task. A review of the top 10 courses in all those areas we're interested in, that's a task. You have to go and do that work, right, to facilitate kind of the next tranche. Yes, you have to review the POIs and all that too, but if you want to position people to get certain degrees paid by ACS, then you have to do that MTO work up front. If you want to go the ASI route, how do you link stuff into that? That, once you start putting those pieces together, hey, these are the top 10 certification programs I'm interested in. Not the easy button at Gamecock USC Finance Core Analytics. But what is really good?
How easy do you think that?
What is really good? What is really good for us, right? And then we figure out how to get there after you do those things. And then, you still gotta, how you pick instructors maybe changes too.
Agreed. Yeah, well, I've already started.
We train them first.
So that will line up the answer to the organizational training.
Yeah.
Automatic, it'll just bring it up.
Yeah, because I'm with you, I couldn't come in and teach the macro Excel class, right?
What are the fundamental courses that they're building beyond the IPSA? So Lieutenant Colonel Skelton Riley mentioned a question about bringing courses into the schoolhouse, but you guys are funded to do, 4 or 5 courses?
Four functional courses, that's right.
Is one of them OBIE?
One of them is data analytics. So it will include all our BIE and anything else.
It's not fully.
It's not there yet, but we're still waiting on the functionality of the system.
So you had that question up there, I meant
So
to.
we had talked quite a bit about that being part of it, like I don't know if it's the baseline or intermediate or something like that, but it can be something.
Right. So that's one avenue.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a start, right?
Yeah. But it would be nice if we can incorporate some of that at every school.
Yeah.
Little bits and pieces, or we build talent, so that way we build the buckets of people that we can reach out. There's more than 50. There's more than 50. I think we have the capacity, we have the ability, and our generation is really good. So why not?
Well, it's gonna get better too, I think. Right. Did Marcus put in play the data staff ride?
I haven't seen it yet, sir.
Versus whatever, I don't know, what have you guys been doing?
Doing this virtual Stalingrad.
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 Virtual staff ride through Stalingrad.
Wow. Okay.
Really bad one.
Yes. There's a virtual aspect to it. We get them on the BBS and.
Yeah, and did you learn that the Romanians crumbled and that's what screwed Von Paulus?
Did we learn that?
The Romanians ran. I said that very deliberately. God bless Romania. The data staff ride was meant to make someone read maybe a book on analytics, something easy like Moneyball, and start to think through how you could challenge what value you bring to a problem set by looking at it differently, and then tying in to either Wells Fargo, UPS, or United on their data journey as they did the same thing, and then kind of go through how they actually transformed their HR analytics on a glide path because of a whole lot of business reasons. I mean, like literally, if you guys created that staff ride here at the AG school, it would be the most interesting staff ride in the United States Army, right? Because you know, again, the easy button is, hey, let's talk tactical scenarios, right? And then how we would, you know, how would we react as an HR professional or whatever, you know. But that, watching those companies, which they would participate, by the way, Rebecca or me could get you the right contacts. They would participate in that kind of an event because they're like rah rah for America. These companies are very patriotic in supporting us in particular, the United States Army.
So there's one last question we have time for, and Kelton Riley mentions what prevents us from using this as an LPD for the force, doing this as an LPD for the force.
Nothing really, but I mean, you could do that as an LCD within your unit. But I mean, I don't think that anything prevents it.
I think it's back to the culture though now, right? We say we want to do it, who's going to buy in?
The people who show up.
It's tough.
Yeah, it's all about
It's
us.
tough to show up.
Yeah.
People who do show up are already
Already birds, like all of
They're coming in sharpshooting people over.
Voluntarily signed up for
It's
this.
like, you know,
I did send out note, that's why I came, but, to, I think from Johnson's point earlier, about 12 years ago, I was here as the XO, the TSB, and at the time, the Finance Corps was having a identity crisis. Hey, Dimers was coming at the time, and they were gonna, and it's gonna go away if we do mill pay. I mean, but what do we do with the Finance Corps? Finance Corps, we're gonna be gone, because that's what we do mill pay. And it took them a while, but they've returned it. Now they're all the budget people, right? There's nothing about mill pay. That's HR's problem. They've dumped it, but they did a pivot. It took many, many years, so successfully, that now they got their own structure, but they built back in with S8s across the formations. The AG community, I appreciate, Greg, what you're saying, because that's where we got to look as well. We're pivoting to the analytics and the people, those special programs, the People First Task Force. All the stuff that we're going to have to do, we have to find a way to program, we got to build resources for it, so we can analyze and we take care of the actual people issues for our commanders, because that's what's eating at our readiness. So I appreciate this, and that's why I'm here, because I don't know it, I don't have geek speak, but I know it's important, and that's why I want to come in and sit in and kind of get an idea, and I made the notes as well as we're going through the programs as they're doing. But first thing we do, identify as we go out, and then we can work with HRC, try to get those people in schools, start building that cadre of expertise across our force. But
I want to thank everybody for coming. I appreciate it. If you have any notes on the outstations, feel free to keep typing them in. We'll collect them. Thank you very much.
All right.
The first one that we're most comfortable in understanding is data. And data analytics is what, you know, at that upper graduate level tier of analytics, we're looking at the ad hoc queries that we may go into data store with and build out Excel documents or access databases and gather all the data for our readiness for our organization. And then as senior leaders within the Corps, we then can use our art that we've experienced over time and start applying how we can affect readiness long-term, maybe based off of previous information that's happened. And we can do some of that predicting to maybe affect the sinus curve that we have, or the sinus rhythm that we have within readiness, maybe making it smaller. So that's the data analytics. We're all very comfortable with that. The next level is that knowledge base. It's predictive analytics. And that's where the machine can kind of spit out and learn based off of all the data that we've put into it. It can spit out and learn if the commander decides to do A, then B is going to be the result. And then that last one there, when we talk prescriptive is what we really ultimately want to get to with the machine learning and AI, artificial intelligence, where the machine is going to say, if you do A, B is going to happen, but maybe you should consider C. C can give us a better option, and C may have never been on the table to begin with. So that's kind of the goal of where we're trying to get when we talk about analytics. And so using these baseline concepts, the breakout group in those 2 50-minute sessions sat down and got after those 3 major components within .mil-PF, which we'll talk about next. In organization, the first thing was there was a general consensus with some dissension. Obviously, not everybody's on the same exact page, but the main group of people decided that at the battalion level is where we need to start seeing some of this capability built. Okay, so looking at each echelon, battalion and higher, we really need to take apart those MTOs and identify where it is that we have to provide capability for data analytics. So is it at the S1 shop at the battalion level where we determine a young NCO, mid-grade NCO maybe, or that officer has an ability to collect this information to turn it into something else and start making recommendations? Or do we need to tier it up, which we'll kind of get to in a later point. So the NCOs, the consensus came that staff sergeant and sergeant was where we'd start to see it at the NCO level. And then the warrant officers, we really felt like every echelon, we needed some sort of capability. And it doesn't mean that every single person that's assigned to the organization now has this additional capability. It just means that it has to have that capability at that echelon. We also talked about a possibility of requiring ASIs and SQI, or excuse me, ASIs per echelon as well, starting again at the battalion level. When we, and I know Mr. Ward mentioned earlier, are we going back into the specialties that we went away from? But one of those discussion points is that 42 Fox. Do we need to bring a 42 Fox-esque type model back where we have somebody whose sole purpose in that organization is now to be that expert in analytics? And then identifying the requirements will drive that demand. So to get the change for long-term, we have to identify where we need those analytics capabilities so that we can drive funding for training, which we'll get into here shortly. Any questions on organization? All right, so for training specifically, we talked through some of the things that we thought would be the best options.
Hey, can you go back one slide? All right, I just think, we talked about this before about, we don't want to get too specialized, but we do think that there's got to be some type of expertise, so identifiable expertise at some level. If it goes back to a comment I think somebody else made earlier about, is it going to be like one or two people at different echelons that have that specialized skill that we're looking for when it comes to the IT portion of this. But I think what we really should be looking at too as an organization is we have a lot of ORSs that are out there in the field. And we did talk about this a little bit. We just didn't capture it on here. But I do want to make sure that Marcus, just for your SA and the team here at SSI, when we look at what ORSs do for our Army writ large, do we need some kind of ORSA-like capability from an AG perspective, or some kind of agreed partnership with an ORSA in an S1 arena? I don't know what the answer to that is, but I do think it's worth just thinking about that.
Ma'am, and I would answer to that. I understand that the ORSA's functions are a large portion of what we're talking about right now, but those ORSA's functions are limited just based off of the amount of ORSA's in the Army. And if we're going to grow to gain a capability, why don't we own it? Because it's going to affect readiness in the long run. So I think that's part of what we want to advocate for.
Absolutely, and it goes back to the relevance issue, right? But I do think we just really need to look at everything holistically and not put ourselves in a vacuum with this. It's not to say that maybe we don't change the ORSA model.
Yes, ma'am.
And that's all. I just wanted to offer that.
All right. Good afternoon. I think it's afternoon. So one of the things, and the ASI is a great concept. However, our current assignment system model does not support assignments based upon ASI. And so we can develop all the ASIs and we can codify them on the MTOs and TDAs, but currently we assign by a 3-digit, and SQIs is really the only other factor that are assigned by. So I think that we need to, if we're going to look at progressive ASIs and building that into the system, we also have to analyze how it's going to impact ASC-EM and AIM to make sure that we get those proper personnel into the organizations in which they require. Absolutely. And I think when we start moving towards this 25-point profile, that's going to be part of that searchable criteria that I can get after to identify those requirements at the levels.
No, I was just going to add, Marlene, it is, our authorizations are built in with the ASIs. Just take Fox 5 and particularly, those HR company or those postal squads. Those ASIs are built in the authorization. The problem is, the utilization of the schools, get them to the schools, and so that's also something we probably need to look at. If we're even talking about going down this road of ASIs, then what is that school going to look like to produce that ASI?
I'm glad you said that. I'm glad you said that. We will talk that shortly. Roger, Major.
All right, sir. And I think you're going to talk about it because I know in our session, we talked about if we're going to go the ASI route, we have to look at utilization. So in other words,
Absolutely.
similar to like a TWI, not master gunner approach, because we don't want to create
You're stealing my
stagnation in
thunder.
certain, installations, but it's identify to this and to that, right?
Absolutely, Sergeant Major.
Thanks, Colonel Motley. Since he put me in the spot, I feel obligated to say something. So-
Yes, sir.
No, I agree with the conversation where it's going. I personally am a fan of ASIs or even PDSIs. I'm not a fan of new MOSs, so to speak, but we need this capability inside because I can't tell you how many times we've asked for ORSA support and there's just none there. There is a severe shortage of ORSAs, and I think fortunately HRC I think has got a good team, and so does Army G1. But when we get down to the Force Com Corps and division level, we're hurting. We're hurting. So we do need this kind of capability. But if I was a hiring official and required that ASI, I mean like when I look at an ORB right now, the first thing I look at is the person joint qualified. Is a 3 Lima. If I was recruiting somebody for the ASI, that'd be the first thing I look at, to screen out, other people who might be applying for that job.
Sir.
And agree with the Sergeant Major, what would that school look like, for the ASI?
But I think some of the other concerns we had were the KD model as well too, right? You look at a guy like Captain Akani sitting up in the IPSA team, and we're to send him off to be a brigade S1 because that's what his KD model requires is an incredible misutilization of talent, if you will, very special talent. So there's a balance to it as well too, right? I say there's 4 or 5 people I can think of in the AG Corps that really don't need to apply their careers to 600-3 or 625 because they have a very unique special set of skills that can improve the Corps, and they're doing it, right? So we have some proof of principle of folks that are really, really, really good at doing this stuff already, and they're already making Army level changes and advances using these kind of analytics. So the problem is that's all self-development based. It's not something, maybe a little bit of training with industry, but to try to create that baseline. And I think that's what we're talking about, right? So we can even self-identify people who have the propensity to do that kind of stuff, and then be able to, as much as possible, try to build the bench of talent, if you will, across the AG.
These are all great points that we're going to address every single one of these things here shortly. So, okay, moving on to training, please. Next slide. We talked about earning the ASI, and Mr. Porter said no foxes, so just ignore that last comment there. But baseline analytics training. So what we really need to start doing, the discussion that we had with some of the sergeants major in the breakouts was that maybe we identified during that first term who has that propensity to pick up this skill set. Maybe they came to the Army with a skill set, and we need to take it. So maybe they like coding on their off time, that kind of thing. And once we get them to that second enlistment, we get them over to ALC, whatever that looks like, that's when we start putting them into these pipelines. And again, when we get down to the end of this, when we start talking a little bit of those policy changes, we'll get into how we can affect that more positively as well. But once we get to the warrant and officer corps, we really want to focus that at least a baseline skill level once they enter into the Corps. So at the BOLIC, at WOBIC, we really want to make sure that's when we're starting to identify talent and then put them in that right pipeline. And we can identify it immediately, similar to how TBCA is working right now, and put them in a pipeline. So maybe they go out and they do some KD for a couple of years, and then they go directly into ACS, TWI, whatever that looks like. And we can build the functional courses here again, but all of that has to come from an understanding of where we need that and at what level, so we can drive the funding to add in training, whether that's functional courses, more money for ACS, TWI, that kind of stuff. And then we need to open that aperture up for what analytics is. And I learned yesterday that there's really 3 main focuses or schools, I guess, within this data analytics. And those are right up here: data engineers, data scientists, and data analysts. Those engineers are those ones that are building those things out. The scientists are the ones that determine what needs to be built. And then we have the analysts. And that's, I think, where we're going to have a lot more of our focus at the HR level. But there's no reason we can't necessarily own some of that portion as well. If we're already harvesting talent, why not do from cradle to the grave concept where we can build it and determine what needs to be built? And I'm not by any stretch of the imagination saying at the battalion level, I have to be able to build a system that can do all of these things. But at what level do we start identifying that talent? And that can be at all levels. Any questions regarding the training? That was more of a comment. There was a lot going on at that point, that there was a definite misunderstanding about what we in the Corps need as far as analytics is concerned. And that really was, this came from a discussion point that when we started talking about like OBIE, that a large portion of our force doesn't understand what it is or what its capability is. And getting to the engineer and scientist portion of that will help us get our field better corrected towards understanding what that looks like.
I was looking at that because you're talking about the engineer and scientists. So I'm looking at IPSA. So IPSA is our engineers and our scientists.
Mm-hmm.
They create the system. The analyst part, especially when you talk about a battalion level, did you guys get after exactly what, I mean, readiness is the automatic key thing we're talking about most likely, but did you guys define different things you'll be looking at? Simple HR metrics, things like that?
No, and in the read-ahead materials specifically, there was an example that we had that was basically talking, we could look at projecting through casualty operations. We could look at projecting readiness metrics, replacement operations. Those are the three big things that we could easily apply this stuff to, but it's not, we didn't draw that out during the breakout sessions.
Okay, because I was looking at the part about identifying what the requirement is before you start looking at what you're going to get. So that's what I was wondering, because especially at that lower level, you look at the LTs that you teach coming through BOLIC, and we're teaching them to think about, okay, well, when you pull a metric, okay, it's descriptive. All right, now you're looking at, okay, last time this was done, you're predicting that it's probably going to expire, something's going to happen at this point, and that's the most basic part of that. So I was trying to figure out how deep we're going to go at a battalion level, but I did not look at your.
Well, and that's in the way ahead that we'll get to here eventually. That was part of the discussion, is we really do have to identify by MTO those requirements, and that's by job. I mean, does a battalion S1 need to do replacement operation plan or analytics understanding? Maybe not. But when we identify that, then we can drive what that does look like.
Again, if we could see this as HR estimates, we won't go crazy with I think the analytics, this is the buzzword. It was called something when I was in college. It was, quality management and dimming and statistics. It was people analytics. And so if we focus on our estimates, and that was difficult. So we did have a little group smart warrants, and we've designed that spaghetti chart that you referred to. And I asked, if you had these type of HR estimates, what would you need if you could reverse engineer them to then figure out why we need analytics? And that's the hard part. And so we're going to help do that. But in the meantime, we're also trying to have a mindset of analytics. So similar to like the brown bag. So getting the concepts out, difference between descriptive, prescriptive, and predictive. There's another one called cognitive. And then, getting those concepts out, whether you know how to do it or not, have the expectation and the intellectual curiosity to learn those things. It's a reading list has several good books that talk about these concepts. The Moneyball book is a good one because it takes a different approach with the constraints and then doing more and then science behind that. There's one called HR Analytics that's on there. And so if we get educated on this, I think we will better know how to use it and what to use it. The idea is just to get into the decision cycle for the commander. So we have stuff that we can inform decisions with. That's the basis of it. So whether it's analytics or you just being smart because you understand systems or processes, you have a professional intuition now. You have numbers and patterns in your head. So without the data, And that's what we don't have. In order to do all this stuff, you need the big data, but your experience sometimes gives you the big data that you need. So you intuitively know stuff. Core G1 intuitively know stuff. Mr. Porter has seen many briefs. We can't wow him with any more briefs because he's looking at them through years of lenses. And we rename it, we repackage it. It's portrait, it's landscape, it's squad charts, it's bullets, it's red, it's stoplight charts, and there's nothing that we can show him that he probably has not seen in some form or fashion. So he's leveraging his experience and his knowledge of data sets. He could probably tell you what, without looking at the raw data, what the readiness rate was for a particular type unit based on historical data. And so that's kind of also twofold. So the data, the people that actually go into big data and pull it, but then you generating your own intellectual curiosity to understand stuff and kind of have a sense of it. And so that's why until we figure out what we want these to look like, the mindset is also important. Over.
Sir, I think that's also what goes towards the ORSA discussion that we've been having is we're the ones that understand how replacement operations plays into the commander's decision to do whatever he's going to do tactically. So I think that's part of why we still have to own this process, because we've got the group think and the memory that we can apply the science, we can apply the art to that science. Any other questions on this one? Okay, so first thing we talked about was recruitment. So messaging to the force before we begin that contract. We have to start looking at some people that we have, again, as we mentioned before, coders, people with maybe degrees in computer science or backgrounds in computer science or any kind of statistics heavy discipline. Looking towards gathering those individuals and not just social sciences or human resources as our only function, which kind of leads into that next point there. We have to change the culture of that standard master's HR degree, and not to talk down about anything, but our core has over 60% of our people with a degree from a certain university in HR because we offer constructive credit at the career course. And that's not necessarily where we need to go. If we want to go data analytics, we need to start pushing things outside of that HR realm involving the stuff that we talked about before. And then experts in more than one area. We hit on this earlier when we talked talent management. We still need to be those experts, but when we assign an ASI, then that functional course that provides that ASI now allows us to go ahead and move in and out of that position. So I can go be a Brigade S1 and a BCT if that's what I want to do, but I have the ASI, so I can just jump over at the end of that, maybe go up to division and work in a G5 cell somewhere doing analytics for the division at that level. So having that ASI provides that capability. So the question, I'll read it out loud. Could there be a pilot program for officers, warrants, and NCOs conducted that allows interested candidates to be a part of a course that has a set criteria for packet submissions, but tests those that are hungry to gain more knowledge in the field data analytics? It's found that willing personnel tend to give knowledge quicker than those who were chosen. ASI should be gained upon successful completion of the course, with candidates receiving ADSOs with the understanding that they will have utilization towards in the positions. I'm glad, again, that you brought this up because all of this will be discussed on the next slide.
So the Army Futures Command, I don't know if there's a linkage to what you have here in concept, but Army Futures Command, of course, is running their program at Austin, and they're quickly trying to figure out an ASI to go with that program as they send these coders and smart people out, and they're all MOSs, so I wasn't in this group, but I have no idea if there is a linkage to that, but just food for thought. And if you thought about it, then
absolutely, and I understood. I got to read through one of the briefs that they were putting together, and it's a lot of machine-focused learning or machine learning focused, so that it could contribute to this process. But again, I think where we still have to inject ourselves is that HR operational specialist.
But looking at the getting those personnel to go off of what Chief said and your last slide, but in that part of where the 25-point base profile is to get those self-professed. So if you have folks like me that have a degree in coding and have all that capability, you'd be able to identify and say, hey, that is how you can utilize and identify those personnel within our formations.
Absolutely, Sergeant Major. I think we just have some holes in the swing. That's all. And at no fault, it's just like, the garbage in, garbage out system theory. If I don't have a specialist that's going down and sitting and updating all of their stuff on the system, then we're not going to know. So that's where the leader engagement comes in. But absolutely agreed, 100%, Sergeant Major.
So I just want to make sure Sergeant Major Neal already knows she was already identified before to come to IPSA, and she decided to go to Hawaii instead. So HRC Sergeant Major Branch decided her talents could be used elsewhere. I don't know. So, yeah. They didn't know she was a coder. So I'll only say a couple of things because one of the reasons we don't ever get to and it's hard to envision being in a place where we would want data analysts is because we don't have data readily available at every echelon. So, we have databases that we keep separately within our brigade S1s, battalion S1s, but, we don't have ready access to the data. So if they changes that, you have data at your fingertips. So, in order to stay relevant, we really do need to move in a direction where we don't let a system that allow us to do this, and we just can't keep up. So, that's part of the discussion on, how do you get to a place where you're really thinking outside your box and expanding based on where we're headed as a corps.
Thanks. Yeah. So another thing that came up in the discussion was about, kind of goes back to what Rebecca said about if saying one system and there's been a lot of talk about, well, we've got to make sure we're using our systems of record, right? And so we don't want to get away from that with this concept, but I think one of the things that we need to think about is what Rebecca's saying is really, really powerful and important, because once you have one database where you can pull the data from, it becomes extremely powerful. I say that based on personal experience in a corporate side using SAP, where we could see all of our people, tens of thousands, it's not millions, but we were able to take that, leverage that into Power BI platform to begin doing some better analytical things with that information. If we think of it the same way Army uses Vantage, if that's a system of record, we could potentially use Vantage and pull data from IPSA into Vantage to do things we've never seen done before. Now, and I don't say that just for the AG Corps, but for the Army writ large. So IPSA is going to be our key to this. What we've got to do is figure out how we harness our talent to ensure that we identify people who are hungry on the IT side of things, who can be really smart with IPSA on the ad hoc reporting and all of the capability that IPSA has, so that then we can take it to the next level. So I think that's what we're really trying to get after here, is those skill sets that are going to be associated with really, really being experts in their craft with all things IPSA to take it to the next level. That's how I envision this.
So we are doing a deeper data dump currently today, as recently as last week, to identify people now to jumpstart the system in lieu of some formal certification programs. And so there are a handful of people we've identified. Proctor, we're going to look at this one to send them into the system, the queue for these programs, so we can have them out there before 3 or 4 years when we get formalized. So Colonel Egger says put in a TWI packet too.
But don't forget one more thing that General Evans said that's really, really important. As HR professionals, we can't lose the fact that we've got to do analog and digital, right? So don't ever forget that that's partly why we can't be solely focused on this. This is going to have to be an enhancement to our already existing skill set. And then we've got to figure out, oh, by the way, when it's compromised, what do we do?
So recommended way ahead, the discussions that we had is the first and most important thing is a change in culture. And that's kind of where I'm going to get into the P that we talked about for policy. Some of the things that were brought up was going to be a drastic overhaul, and maybe not drastic, but a significant overhaul in policy to the way we think. So one, we talked earlier, we need to look at changing a career maps for all cohorts, right? We need to start talking about maybe, and this may be the extreme version of it, but we think right now the NCO and Force Com needs to go and do his or her DASSER time or drill time, right? Is there also a portion on the 42 map where we talk about hitting up some of that analytics capability? Maybe we talk about changing the way we think about CSL as far as 42s are concerned, and we give constructive credits in certain occasions where we really need those lieutenant colonels or their sergeants major to work in that area. Again, that culture change, and it's going to start here at PME, where we hyper focus our students in for at least a small portion of the time on the capabilities that we were looking for, and then harnessing those that are interested and maybe putting them into a local school, or maybe pushing them into that pipeline immediately for functional area. Or again, if there's some sort of TBCA-esque program, we could start them through that pipeline as well. So the way we think, as just kind of going back to where we started, thinking about those senior leader engagements, and we talked about in the 25-point profile, it's easy for me to grab data, but it's senior leader engagement to making sure that I understand what my soldiers are capable of. That's going to help me harness that capability. And then how we think about analytics. So there's that world that we've lived in for so long where we do ad hoc queries, and we apply that art that we have experience with to that science and making recommendations to the commander. And that is a great tool that we have, but we can do more, and we have to get our leadership within the AG Corps to identify that we can do more and we should do more, because it's going to just result in a better product across the board. We came across the fact that we just really need to go back and as I started out with, identify within our MTOs at what echelon, and by doing that, identifying who needs to do what will drive the change that we can fix long-term to get funding, training, and all that stuff. So pending any questions, that's going to conclude data analytics.
It's okay. So my brain was moving a little bit. It doesn't move much very often, so I figure I should mention. Hey, so I was trying to think about how we incentivize it as well too, right? Because it's definitely a skill set that is highly sought after. You offered what, 160K to walk away from the Army, double your pay to go work on the SA team. Thanks a lot. But it's a language, right? I mean, because you kind of asked, right? Do you speak Python, right? So it's a language. But I'm thinking, so there are a lot of language skills, right? And we have these things, and we can associate. It's just another ASI, right? But you associate skills. But is it too outside the box to think of certain different types of languages? And as they become more and less relevant, and the pay is less relevant that goes to it, but that incentivizes people as well to go out and learn those languages and learn how to utilize those. And there's a test, right? There's a test that goes with languages as well too, and maybe there's a test that goes with computer languages. And it was just something that kind of crossed my head, and I figured I'd.
I failed to mention, Chief, absolutely, the discussion we had, Sergeant Major, yesterday was that absolute thing with, we do have to incentivize it. We have to do utilization tours way more effectively than we are right now, right? We can't just send you off to a school and say, hey, you got a utilization tour, and then assign you somewhere where they're going to say, oh, you're a 42, just do S1 stuff, right? We have to make sure that they're going into that hard-coded slot that will absolutely get them get the Army to get that value back after we've just dumped all this time in. And as with any training, we got to stamp some ADSOs, because.
Can I interject for a second on this? Because I'm a little bit ahead of you on that. So in my former life, when I was in our cyber, I wrote a law for cyber programming language pay. The law's already been adapted. It's working its way down through OSD to get the services. And there's 26 different languages that will be paid. Did the revision for AR 11-6 to incorporate that. Cyber Proponent right now owns how do they quantify testing. Now in cyber, because we're associated with work roles, which is a lot like the data analytics that we do or we're discussing here. And we assigned them to the work role to codify how you test the language, whether you're a basic, intermediate, or an advanced, and then your pay is associated. I modeled a proposal, and when I went through OCLL, I went after and used the same law that existed for foreign language proficiency pay, and I could articulate how we would get certification through cyber programming languages to enable that to transfer into, this is your initial certification. And then the way I wrote the law was not that you had to do an annual language recertification, but that you had to, if you were actively working in a work role and using that programming language daily, whether it's Python, PowerShell, Fortran, or one of the 26, that you would not have to certify annually and you would be able to get paid, but that was based upon your work role proficiency and how we codified it. Yes, sir. So I can't say how much I did while I was still at USERPAC. That my second law is in. My third law, I talked with Judge Jenner Barringer yesterday, and I've got my third law working in, and that's the last one I'm going to do before like done. But I do, the law is already written and we're going. I have I don't want to get ahead of OSD and PR, JD Riley and Larry Locke, they're all tracking at DAG1. So that's already coming, and I did it from a cyber perspective, but we'll be able to capitalize it because the way I wrote the law would open up to everybody. And so when OSD and I went through the joint staff and get all the other services online, everybody agreed that yes, this was how we're going to do it. And we opened it up so we could use it for the next, we could use it for our data analytics, our ORSAs, and anyone else.
One more quick input, Chief Mercier from First Corps. I don't know if we looked into this or if we consider for self-development. I know Air Force has a contract with Udemy. It was sometime when the Army could still get in, but whatever. But those courses, I think they're invaluable. That's how I learned a lot of my stuff on online courses. And again, might not be for everybody, but people that do want to self-develop and learn stuff on their own, I think there's something that the Army could invest and get some good return on investment with those.
I think part of multi-tiered, sir. I think that part of it's going to be a very baseline understanding that you would see in BOLIC or Career Course or WOBIC or WOAC, where here's what analytics is capable of, here's how you can collect some of that data, and here's a little bit of the art that we as leaders will apply to this science. I think the real training comes in ACS or TWI or certifications or a functional course through the schoolhouse specifically, sir.
And so just as a note, we do a very basic level of analytics within the basic course, the OBC. So before you come to OBC, and WOBC, you have to do the basics Excel course through Skillport. And then as you go through the course, when you're dealing with HR metrics and you're dealing with some other stuff, they're applying those abilities, right? So, but it's utilizing Microsoft tools. And then before you go to the advanced course in the CCC, you do have to do the advanced Excel Skillport training. And that does create a baseline of that to be able to do some data manipulation to understand formulas and et cetera, to how to get to things, doing pivot tables, and that stuff is implemented throughout the courses. And I think they're doing that down in the academy as well too. So there is a level of baseline. So I think it's building upon that as to where we want to go and figure out what kind of gaps in languages we have. And
I think part of the thing is, yeah, that baseline though is so varied. I mean, we have people that don't understand that if you highlight cells in Excel, they count for you, right? That was me 15 years ago. But regardless, I think we have to get to the point where we are not teaching that level of stuff to our students, that they have to come ready. And we're working on designing access databases as a baseline, as opposed to, because going back to that beginning slide where we talked about data analytics, we are already doing that ad hoc function, and we're trying to get to the other two. And I think right now what we're teaching our students is way to the left of that chart, and we got to get more towards the center at the PME, sir.
And part of what influences is the funding of the training systems we're given. So in the past, we've had training systems for EMOPO, for TOPNES, ENES. As we transition through IPSE, there was a big funding dump, and those systems are not reliable in training right now. So as we further develop the IPSE training system capacities, then we can further the analysis that we can lead them through these different models of thinking. And so we can give them, for example, we can give them a PowerPoint to show them what can IPSE do for you. This is an example. Now let's walk through how to build that. And IPSE is, of course, much further along in the delivery of those products than us having to figure out how to work access databases to make things presentable. So if we can increase the funding, and the faster we can get those training systems in-house, the further we can progress with the analytics that we deliver here at the schoolhouse.